Hello Internet, I'm the Disney Brain, back with part 2 of Ninja Storm, the chill season of Rangers. We all know why we're here, so let's get right into it and discuss the main characters. Most of Lothar's generals aren't much in the way of complex characters, but Lothar himself, as well as his nieces, represent exactly what the season is going for. Lots of humor, lots of goofiness, and even the occasional wink at the audience. All meant to say, hey, Rangers gets pretty serious sometimes. Why not have a little bit of fun this go round? It's as if even Lothar knows that Lothar will eventually be beaten in the end, so why not entertain the audience beforehand? Because the fact of the matter is, Lothar could have had a grander, heavier backstory. Ninja Storm could have made the plight of two brothers a more substantial subplot, but they actively chose not to. Heck, Lothar is probably more evil as a young Wind Ninja student than as a fully grown adult, and Lord only knows who he married along the way to end up with two spoiled alien nieces. I think there's always a benefit to adding layers of complexity to a story, if done right, but at the same time, Lothar is hilarious, so I think his execution was done just as well as many other villains, even without Lothar himself being top tier in that category. And there's one very clever detail about him that's just too good not to mention. His final plan begins and ends with the Abyss of Evil, a fissure that seems to resemble Earth-based ninja abilities, but stronger. I believe that's because we know he's an Earth Ninja based on his uniform in the Samurai Journey. Just a really nice detail there. But, unfortunately, his brother is a little bit less memorable. Credit to Grant McFarlane for putting in double time to voice him and play Lothar, but I just don't see Guinea Pig Sensei as that great of a sensei. He teaches a few good lessons and gives some good advice, but that's about it. On that front, he's got a lot more in common with Mentor G than RJ. What it comes down to is this: I don't feel like the team, other than Cam, was very challenged by him or his teachings. It just felt a little too easy, even for the handful of okay lessons he delivers. Even in a not so serious season like this, he's just kind of bland, and most of the time, Cam's behind the scenes communications were a lot more instructive and crucial than anything Sensei had to offer. I place a high emphasis on Ranger mentors because the great ones can change the landscape of an entire season, but nothing about how the characters trained, developed, or progressed left me thinking that they needed Sensei's perspective, especially since there's nowhere near the amount of character progression here versus the similarly constructed Jungle Fury. In the end, Guinea Pig Sensei is way more keeper than Kruger. Nice to have around, says a couple good things, but is far from necessary as a character in terms of teaching. Now, let's discuss the Rangers themselves. In line with the lackluster mentorship this season, we have a team of Rangers that are all at least pretty good, but not a ton of character growth, which is strange since the original three did not start off as exemplary students, so there's a ton of room for growth. To preface what comes next, there's a lot of things I like and love about Ninja Storm, and as a season of Power Rangers, it's definitely one of my favorites, and I think I've given this season a bit of leeway since it's proven it wants to function more like Mighty Morphin and less like Lightspeed Rescue, but even still, it's hard to overlook some of the lacking development this time around. Allow me to explain what I mean by all of that by first looking at the Thunder Rangers. We talked a lot about the brothers Bradley in part 1, since they cover a sizable part of the early plot. I still think there was a lot that could have been changed about how and when they appeared, as well as how they resolved, but they're both fine characters. But beyond the 8 or so episodes that directly relate to them, they don't really grow or change too much. We don't even get to see what kind of internal dilemmas they must have faced in between Thunder Strangers and Return of Thunder. It would have been interesting to see how the brothers coped with the truth behind the fate of their parents, or even learn more about the Thunder Ninja Academy and the ways it diverges from the Wind Ninja Academy. But the fact that they do come from a completely different branch of ninjas doesn't seem to mean much outside of the different looking outfits, and that's exactly what I mean by lacking. There's a lot of great angles to take with these characters, but said angles are barely explored in favor of forgettable filler episodes. Whether intentional or not, there was a lot left on the table here that could have been used to make the Bradleys feel more complete. They were going through their own very distinct journey here, but the way the season progresses made it seem like they're no different than any other Ranger here on that front. They're both well portrayed by their respective actors though, and there are times when they do feel like actual brothers. There's plenty of good there, but plenty of missing that could have easily replaced such scenes as absurd dick-measuring push-up contests. With Tori Hansen, you have a good character who shows sense, sensibility, and skill. But that presents its own issue. Since Tori starts off like that, she really doesn't have much to do in terms of character growth. So one of her most impactful contributions to the season ends up being a romantic attraction to Blake and everything that comes as a result. That works out pretty well, because I do think there's solid chemistry there, but beyond that, there's just not much else to Tori. In many ways, it feels like Tori is there because she has to be, in order to balance out the team with her personality. Can you imagine if it was these two guys and maybe Ronnie or even Kelsey? They'd be loud and fun but never get anything done, all while poor Cam burns through Advil. I've mentioned before that not all Rangers need to go through massive character arcs to be great characters, but if that's going to be the case, then at least showcase a deeper side of who she already is. We got that from Maddie, we got that from Kira, so I think that even here, it's a fair thing to ask for. Next, we have Shane, who isn't exactly a complex character either, but just like Dustin, he does get a few choice episodes that really allow him to shine, and none better than Shane's Karma, partly because those episodes operated more like something out of a completely different season. But I'd have to call it one of my favorite Battleizer episodes, because it did add something to Shane as a character. It showed us who he really was, even as a kid. It showed us that making a positive difference was always important to him. It gave us some context as to why he'd choose to become a ninja, and why he'd be chosen to lead this team. And even though Shane scoffed at the idea of Power Rangers early on, I love the fact that his older brother Porter was proud of him for being the Red Ranger. It's minor, but it proves that despite a tiny bit of evidence to the contrary, Ninja Storm does recognize and respect its history. There are several episodes in the franchise with a similar structure, including a very good Wild Force episode with Alyssa and her father at the center. And I almost always like these kinds of episodes because every now and then, it's nice to have one of the people you're fighting for recognize that, hey, what you're doing, fighting for those who can't fight for themselves, that's important. That matters. Thank you for doing it. All in all, Shane ends up as a nice character with the added benefit of having a few really good stories attached to him. I would never call him top tier though, because as a leader, he just doesn't stand out or stack up, especially when compared to others such as... Andros! Yeah, totally the guy I was thinking of. But he's still a really good fit for this particular season. Dustin is easily the lifeblood of Ninja Storm, the one guy on the hero side doing the most to foster that comedic lighthearted tone I keep coming back to. He's the guy that makes it all work. Given that, you'd think that Ninja Storm would do more to reward his goofiness. But, in a smart play, they actually force Dustin's heart of gold to be challenged by people not deserving of his trust initially, and when he trusts them anyway, he gets burned for it. It's subtle, but it does change him to an extent, because even though his jovial nature never gets completely overhauled, he does go through his own patient development. Remember near the end when he wanted to switch things up in motocross by doing more freestyle and less racing? Maybe just a throwaway plot point, but I think it's actually him really trying to grow up, figure out who he is, and avoid being defined by a singular trait, which is a perfect parallel to him not wanting to only be defined as a goofball comic book nerd, because that carefree mentality did not do him any favors on at least 2 occasions. It was one of the few times this season where it felt like there was a lot of thought put into character growth. Because Dustin grows, maybe more so than any character here, below the surface, and it strikes me as both ironic and oddly fitting that the most outspoken of our lead heroes can be viewed as developing in such a downplayed way. Saving the best for last brings us tech expert turned superhero, Cam Watanabe. His numerous abilities, including building and knowing how to repair the Zords, speak for themselves. But what's really crucial about Cam is his personality, because it directly contrasts with the others. A relaxed season, fittingly, has a relaxed team, which means keeping these guys in line is more Cam's responsibility than even Sensei's, who never manages to challenge them in the way that Cam constantly does, and in some cases, has to. But it makes sense, because despite the fact that he's always been highly skilled, even beyond his computer screen, 3 not so great students were picked above him. There's gonna be a little contention there early on. With those 3, becoming Power Rangers was a straightforward transition created from prophecy. But for Cam, becoming a Ranger needed to be more of an active choice. With him and the Thunder Rangers, there's the element of becoming heroes through the desire to be, in spite of parental history. All 3 needed to be more than what they were, be it henchmen or tech support. This was a smart way to set up the 3 extra Rangers because the opening narration only speaks of 3 chosen above the others. So, if there's gonna be 3 more, then it should be more than just here's your morpher, now off you go. And as we discussed when we talked about Cam's 3-part samurai journey, there is a poetic nature to his character arc here that represents perhaps the best story this season has to offer. Even with a simpler narrative structure, there's still a lot this season has to say with some of its characters, but I think the way that Vexicus, and to a lesser extent Shimazu, is introduced, utilized, and taken down might be the most telling thing about what Ninja Storm seeks to accomplish. Isn't it fitting that a ruthless bounty hunter and an ancient warlord would see someone like Lothar, who creates TV shows in his free time, and think, hey, why aren't we the ones running the season instead of this doofus? It can be viewed as two more traditional Ranger villains attempting to re-establish the status quo by trying to supersede the most intentionally comedic Ranger villain maybe ever. And this is the plot that receives a fair bit of focus on the back end of the season. The Rangers themselves go through a couple of one-off plot lines that are easily resolved, including a fun little alternate reality role reversal episode. But Vexicus and Shimazu are the ones really moving the story along after teaming up, which comes to a head in General Deception. Chubo got some shine in Return of Thunder, but here we get more from Zergain, who, for a time, has the upper hand against the Rangers. Meanwhile, the Evil Alliance calmly and patiently waits for one side or the other to be weakened, and then Vexicus casually murders Zergain. And then, in the very next episode, while Lothar is occupied with his own plans, Vexicus destroys Motor Drone. And then, Vexicus plans to wipe out his partner in crime before the nieces of all people manage to do it first. Ninja Storm started off as a more lighthearted take on the Ranger franchise in writing, concept, and tone. But as soon as Vexicus came around, it became less about a self-parody of the villain archetype and more about offing your adversaries Arya Stark style. And this is what I think really worked on the back end of Ninja Storm. The idea of conceptually divergent villains almost forcibly changing what the season was supposed to be, which also makes it fitting that Mara and Capri, the epitome of comic relief characters, are the ones to eventually bring down both before it's all said and done. A pair of silly, airheaded sisters who anyone would assume pose no threat, found a way to off two exceptionally dangerous villains, and on top of that, Lothar knew what Vexicus was doing, and let him keep doing it to set up his final plan. And all the while, Vexicus swore he was pulling off the best villain heist since Deviant got one over on Scorpius. But, in the end, three comic relief characters proved in their own ways that just because they fool around and occasionally break the fourth wall doesn't mean they aren't cunning, strong, or capable. In a lot of ways, seeing all of that unfold felt like more of a thematically appropriate close to the season than the actual season finale, which is an okay finale, but it's really just a less inspired version of the powerless Rangers finish that Wild Force nailed. Getting back to Vexicus and what his rise and fall seems to symbolize, I can't think of a better metaphor for the entire season. A season that knows what it wants to be, understands how to achieve it, and doesn't need a cold-blooded killer at the center of it all to make things more gritty, because that's what we have other seasons for. Ninja Storm wants to be its own season so much that it actively fights against all that. By wanting to test out different directions, Ninja Storm helped pave the way for Dino Thunder and r.p.m. to also utilize self-referential humor to great effect. Even though there is a lot of up and down with this season, I can't overstate how important and impressive it is that Ninja Storm revolutionized the way Ranger stories could be told, and because the central premise is always colorful spandex-wearing heroes fighting silly monsters, this franchise was perfectly positioned for exactly that kind of humor. As most of you know, I am far more inclined to praise the seasons that go out of their way to deliver a more compelling, character-driven story, and throughout this review, I've kept harping on about what Ninja Storm was missing, or what it could have done better. But ideally, what I'd like you all to take away from this analysis, if anything, is that despite my legitimate concerns with the pacing, the plotting, and the structure, there's so much that Ninja Storm does right in spite of that, and in many cases, because of that. And every now and again, you still get some narrative magic and they deliver a really great episode or series of episodes. For the last couple of years, we've had Ranger seasons that almost all feel like ill-conceived clones of each other. But the fix is an easy one, because the Disney era was also in jeopardy before Ninja Storm rolled in, and they made it work. Not just because New Zealand saved money, but also because they understood exactly what changes to make and how to make them, which led to higher ratings. And even though overall impressions of this particular season are still somewhat mixed, as is also the case of this analysis, passion, creativity, but also organization were all clearly present during the short-lived reign of Ann Austin and Doug Sloan. Unlike Overdrive, which plastered so many ideas on top of each other that you'd swear they were making it up as they go, Ninja Storm kept things simple and worked with a few ideas at a time. They also wisely holstered some of their unused ideas and assets from the development phase. Emma Lahana tried out for the part of Tori before eventually losing out to Sally Martin, and one early concept for this season involved bringing back Jason David Frank. Needless to say, both were brought back the very next year to contribute to one of the best seasons ever. So, how do we improve Power Rangers in the modern day? Simple. Bring back producers, directors, and writers that want to be there. Bring back people who are committed to a vision that might be different, that might be out there, that might be ambitious, but just might work. My recommendation is an easy one. Bruce Kalish. Yes, I get it. Fight scenes are not his forte, but take away his infamous background explosions, and he's undeniably one of the brightest minds Rangers has ever had. And honestly, who would you rather see every week? Characters like Boom or Cat, or whatever the hell next year's version of Victor and Monty will be. Getting back to the season at hand, Ninja Storm is, for all the reasons I've explained, the chill season of Power Rangers. Beyond a handful of moments, things never really get too heavy, or too deep, or too personal, or too complex, even though there were numerous avenues for it to take those turns. But, just like how Jack is not your typical Red Ranger, Ninja Storm is not your typical season, and in both cases, reinventing what quality looks like had its own benefits. So while there are several better seasons out there, Ninja Storm will always be a special one. One that disregarded certain story elements to present us with brand new ones, or fresh takes on old ones, because that's what it wanted to be, and that's what it wanted to do. Even though we never discussed it outright, that clearly defined purpose, its reason for existing, is its overarching theme. And, in its own way, in a much less pronounced way compared to In Space, it too quietly saved the franchise. And that was Ninja Storm. More of an analytical discussion more than a full-fledged thematic analysis. After we discuss Season 1 of Ninja Steel, I'll be focusing on Power Ranger topics more so than Power Ranger seasons, but don't worry, we'll get back to that. A few of you have asked for a video explaining what I would do with an entire Ranger season, so maybe we'll do that down the line. But what I think would be more interesting is to make a video that gets everyone involved. So next time, we'll be talking about what team of Rangers, given the choice of all of them, do you think would make the best team? But until then, thanks for watching.